Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes. Number one, all of our participants are on mute, but we definitely want to address your questions. So we ask that you use the question portion of the dashboard, and I'll take a look at your questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is, will we have access to this presentation afterward? And the answer is yes. The slides are going to be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you want to rewatch this webinar with voiceover, we have a link for that too on our website, and it's hosted on the PJR YouTube page. Our presentation is going to cover a couple of key topics. We're going to first dig into why certifications are done through a two-stage process, and we'll talk you through then the lead up to the stage one, the quotation phase, some of the activities prior to the stage one. We'll go through the stage one itself front to back, show you what happens during the stage one. We'll talk a little bit about some of the more common issues that come up during a stage one, including those that can prevent continuance to the stage two. We'll have some ideas on how you should respond to those recommendations and ensure that you're fully ready for the stage two. A few concluding remarks and then your questions. Now, as to why we do certification in two stages, the short version is we're required to. PJR is held accountable to a number of requirements as an accredited certification body, and those come primarily from ISO 17021. And that standard has a clause that reads as follows: the initial certification audit of a management system shall be conducted in two stages, stage one and stage two. And the standard then goes on to explain what needs to be looked at during the stage one audit itself. Now, as to why they wrote 17021 in that manner and made that mandatory, part of why it's done that way is to ensure that only those companies that are truly prepared for certification are permitted to complete the full audit. Many years ago, certification used to be a one-step process, and there were times when a company would sign up for a certification audit, the auditor would show up, and things were in very bad shape, and essentially the audit was a waste of everyone's time. So this is why they now have a two-phase approach to the certification. So everything begins with the contractual phase. Now, obviously, you have to be a contracted client before we can do a stage one audit at your facility. Now, part of the process for getting you under contract involves a document that we refer to as the F1. Now, this is an application, and we have a variety of F1s. We have them for each of the sectors that we do certification for, so ISO 9001, 14001, and so forth. The F1, even our basic F1 for ISO 9001, is a complex document. There's a lot of prompts. There's a lot of requests for different types of information. Now, we ask for all of that information up front for a variety of reasons. Number one, we want to be competitive in our quoting. We want to make sure that we have all of the relevant information so that we can give you as fair a quote in terms of audit time as possible. Your head count, the head count of your facility, is the primary factor, of course, and that's based on the International Accreditation Forum Mandatory Document Number 5, or IAFMD5 for short. But there are other things that can come into play in terms of how we might reduce audit time, or in some cases where it might be necessary for us to increase audit time. So this is why we ask for a thoroughly filled out F1 application. Now, speaking of the MD5, you should be aware that in terms of discounting audit time, the maximum discount that we are permitted is 30%, and that's actually stipulated right in MD5 itself. MD5 is a public domain document. If you go to Google and you Google IAF MD5, you can download a copy of it for yourself and see where the audit time information is specified. So if you have a quotation from a competing registrar that is dramatically different from what you're getting from PJR, approach that with suspicion, because we are always very, very careful to adhere to the MD5 and ensure that we are applying the discounts appropriately. Now, once we have you under contract, you're going to be assigned to what we refer to as an audit program coordinator. You will know this person as your scheduler. And the scheduler is intended to service the needs that you have. They're going to manage you, as they say, cradle to grave. They are going to assign the auditor to you. They're going to work with you on do the dates work? Does this particular auditor work? They'll give you some background on who that auditor is going to be. Now, bear in mind that as much as we work to assign an auditor that's close by, we recognize that travel expenses are bothersome. We have to make sure that the auditor that we're assigning is qualified in your standard and competent in your technical area. So let's say, for example, that you are in mining. You have a business that involves aspects of mining. We could assign an auditor in the neighborhood if that person also has experience in that technical area. We want the auditor that walks in your door to have some understanding of what they're working with, some understanding of the area, so that they can audit your processes with a degree of confidence and add value to the system by doing so. Now, the other early thing that you'll be getting from your scheduler is an attestation of readiness. Now, this document is referred to as the F108, and this is a critical document, and I'd like to explore it a bit on the next slide. So again, we have these for all of the major scopes that we do certification for. And it's a checklist, really, and it's filled out by you, our client. And essentially, by filling this out, you are confirming to us that you have all of the following. Now, again, these are going to vary a bit from scope to scope. You're indicating you've defined your scope. You know what your exemptions are. You have determined what your processes are. You've determined how those processes interact with each other. You are stating that you have process measurables, or KPIs, and the related performance data. You are indicating that you have evidence of a complete internal audit, evidence of a complete management review, that you have control over your outsourced processes, and that you've considered applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. You have all of the required documentation, and also potentially, hopefully, the PJR Form F191, and that's another item that's going to be coming in just a few slides here. But again, the F108 is it's an official statement saying we're ready for our Stage 1 assessment. We've covered all of the things that are required for a successful Stage 1. Now, the F191, this is a document that gets a little confusing for some of our clients. What the F191 is supposed to do is help you ensure that the processes you've established for your system represent a fulfillment of all the clauses of the applicable standard. And the intent is for you to document what your processes are. These are going to be the processes that you've identified on your interaction of processes, and assign the clause numbers accordingly. So let's walk through an example of how this would typically get put together. So let's begin with the raw interaction of processes. Let's say that this is your IOP. Now, if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that there are 6 identified processes. And we've got those outlined here. We have sales, we have purchasing, production, shipping, quality, and support. So these are the processes that need to be organized on the F-191. So let's do that. Okay, here we are. So we now have 6 processes on the left-hand side here, as you can see, and every single clause number, with the exception of 8.3, has representation. Now, as you can see, the majority of the clauses are covered under what this organization has termed support. But that is, of course, not the only way to meet this requirement. There are lots of ways that you can fulfill this particular requirement. This organization has chosen to do so through a collective process called support. But we have all of the clauses accounted for. Again, with the exception of 8.3. Now, the takeaway here is that this organization is likely not design responsible, so there are no processes that 8.3 would apply to. We would then use this document as part of the audit planning process. We would send this to the auditor and say, here is what we have been provided as far as the processes are concerned and how they interface with the requirements of the standard. So now it's audit day, and we have the auditor is going to be coming out to your facility. Unless you have made arrangements for an off-site stage 1. Now, we do offer off-site stage 1 audits for a couple of our standards, the primary being ISO 9001. There is a savings in travel costs, but typically the total audit time is more because we have to make up that on-site audit time when we get to your facility for the stage 2 audit. So assuming that the stage 1 is going to be conducted on site, you should be, and actually this applies regardless of whether the audit's being done on site or not, you should be contacted by your auditor at least a few days in advance of the stage 1. Now, my personal preference is to talk to my clients somewhere in a 7 to 14 day range ahead of the actual audit day. Just to confirm details, make sure that everything is all set for the audit. And if for a stage 1 audit, you should expect to receive an audit plan. Even though the stage 1 audit is a very straightforward activity, we do require here at PJR that audit plans be provided for all audit types. This includes the stage 1. And we ask that when you receive the audit plan that you review it and confirm that the information on the audit plan is correct. Definitely let your auditor know if there is a piece of information on that audit plan that is not correct. Now, again, you might think this strange, being that this is just a stage 1 audit, but like all other audits, it commences with an opening meeting. This is an excellent chance for you and the auditor to confirm any last-minute changes and to make sure that the auditor is aware of any critical information. If you have other visitors that are going to be coming, people that have availability issues, and so forth. And from the opening meeting, the auditor will proceed according to their plan. We have a designated stage 1 workbook that the auditor uses. And everything that is reviewed during a stage 1 is documentation based in nature. The stage 1 is unique in that there are no nonconformances that are issued. For everything that the auditor reviews, they are given 2 options. It is either marked as conforms or concern. And we generally define concern as anything that represents a disconnect between your implemented process and the related requirements from the applicable standard. Now, once the auditor has completed the review of the required materials, typically they're going to need some time to prepare their audit report, which is typically going to be on site. And as I said earlier, there are no nonconformances. And I like to use this wording when I talk to folks on the phone about this process. The Stage 1 audit is the one and only time in your certification cycle where it's a gimme in terms of the issues that are raised. You can address all of the issues that are raised without having to take formal corrective action. And that's unique and helpful. You don't have that option if an item is raised in a Stage 2 or a surveillance audit. If it's raised in that context, you have to issue a formal corrective action for it. The Stage 1 audit is the one and only time in your certification cycle where these types of things are shared with you in a formal manner via the Stage 1 report, but you do not have to take formal responses. You can just fix the issue that's been raised. You will have a closing meeting for the Stage 1 audit to discuss the results. And I definitely encourage you, if you do not understand something that has been stated in the report or in the context of the closing meeting, you need to speak up. You need to tell the auditor, I don't understand this issue. Can we discuss this? Can you help me get my arms around what the particular disconnect is as you see it? All Stage 1 audits have one of three possible outcomes. Recommend for continuance to Stage 2 with no concerns. That's obviously the ideal outcome. Recommend for continuance to Stage 2 with concerns. This is probably the most common outcome, and we'll go over what some of those concerns tend to be in just a bit. And in rare cases, if there's a lot of real core fundamental issues, recommend for a repeating of the Stage 1. Now, you will be asked to sign an acknowledgement of the results, and you will be given a copy of the completed audit report. Now, if the auditor has travel issues and whatnot, it may be a few additional days before you receive the finalized audit report, but we do endeavor to get all completed reports to our clients as quickly as possible. Officially, we give the auditors a week to complete their audit reports, but in the case of a Stage 1 audit, it almost never takes that long. Now, as far as things that can prevent continuance to the Stage 2, the things that might be marked concern in the report, if you have not done an effective job of defining what your processes are and how they interact, if the interaction of processes that we're given is a regurgitation of the PDCA diagram from the standard, if it is something canned that you received from a consultant and it doesn't really reflect what your processes are, those are possible items that will get noted as concern in the report. I have a separate webinar that I do called The Interaction of Processes and Its Importance to a Successful Audit. If you're having difficulty or if you have concerns about the IOP that you've put together, I definitely recommend that you join us for that webinar so we can show you ideally how that item is put together and how it should be reflective of what you do. Another item, probably the largest concern, and one that would potentially lead to a recommendation of repeating the Stage 1, is inadequate process measures or process performance data. Now, ISO 9001 requires that you monitor, measure, and analyze your processes. The expectation is that every process will be monitored or measured in some way, shape, or form. Now, the standards vary a bit in what is required as far as the data is concerned. IATF 16949, for example, requires 12 months of data. For ISO 9001, it simply has to be enough data to demonstrate that the process is working. What is not acceptable is to be in a situation where there are no measures and or there are measures but no data. You have to have at least enough data to demonstrate that the processes are overall effective. Now, as far as how many measures are required, also this will vary a bit. For some of our clients, it is a matter of having just a few measures, and they make the argument that that covers all of their processes. And depending on what those measures are, that's going to generally be considered acceptable. A couple of other potential issues that come up. We might see an issue with the internal audit. We look for evidence that the internal audit is planned. We look for notes showing that all processes were audited. Sometimes when we look over the internal audit notes, we'll see nonconformances, but not a whole lot of what did you look at during the audit? Who did you talk to? What processes did you review? Jobs, so forth. We'll look at the nonconformances that are written up. We'll look at the corrective actions even and kind of get our arms around, are you doing an effective job of responding to internal audit issues? And obviously try to make sure that your auditors are not auditing their own work. Now, if you get to the stage 1 audit and you haven't done the internal audit yet, we can recommend continuance to stage 2 if we have evidence that you have a firm plan for the internal audit to be done prior to stage 2. That is acceptable. But bear in mind, if that is what happens, you lose the benefit of getting feedback on your internal audit prior to the stage 2. And remember, I said a few minutes ago, the stage 1 is the only audit in your cycle where we can share feedback of this nature with you, and you just fix it without having to take formal corrective action. If we look at an internal audit during a stage 2 and there are issues with it at that phase, now we have to write a nonconformance, and now you have to respond to it with formal corrective action. We may also see issues in internal auditor competency. Now, bear in mind, with competency of internal auditors, it's just like everything else in your system. You are permitted to set your own criteria for what makes an internal auditor qualified. We just need to see proof that your internal auditors have met those competency requirements. Now, in some other standards, IATF 16949, AS 9100, there are additional provisions for internal auditor competency that need to be met. In a similar fashion to the internal audit, we also make a point of looking at the management review. We want to make sure that all of the required inputs and outputs have been addressed. We want to make sure that you have had a productive meeting. In other words, that you did not just churn through the data, but that decisions and actions were made. That's the verbiage that's used in the standard. A lot of our clients like to use PowerPoint slides for their management review. That's fine. But again, we want to see the fruits of your discussion, the minutes, if you will. Now, in a similar fashion to internal audit, if you have not yet conducted the management review, but you've planned it, and it's going to take place prior to stage 2, that's acceptable at the stage 1 audit. But again, you lose the benefit of having an auditor review it in a non-binding context. Now, all stage 1 conclusions are subject to executive committee concurrence. All of our stage 1 audit reports get reviewed by a member of the PGR executive committee to ensure that the decisions are appropriate and fair. And all of our clients have the right to file a dispute or an appeal of an auditor's decision. We have a special procedure for this. It's called Pro 10. And Pro 10 is available for download anytime from our website. Now, if the recommendation is to repeat the stage one audit, we recommend that you work from the audit report to shore up the issues and keep in contact with your auditor and with the, as necessary, with the PGR Executive Committee to discuss what you're doing to make sure that you're on the right path to a better result during your next stage one audit. We have a whole team of people here at PJR, and we're very interested in helping you succeed. We want to make sure that the audit is a good audit, a fair audit, and that everyone on all sides is satisfied with the result. If you are recommended to proceed to stage two, we ask that you have a minimum of 30 days between the stage one and stage two. Ideally, we like to see more like 60 to 75 days. And also, remember, we do have a 21-day cancellation policy in terms of non-recoverable travel expense. Our experience has shown that having back-to-back stage one and stage two audits is almost always going to lead to trouble in terms of issues coming up at stage one that would prevent continuance to stage two. Use that time between stage one and stage two to address any issues, any areas of concern that were identified during the stage one audit. If you do not address those items, it is likely that they will result in formal nonconformities during the stage two audit. In conclusion, we want our clients to feel confident and comfortable with the stage one audit process. The care that is taken in the pre-stage one phase and the mutual support of your auditor and our executive committee are intended to help this process be as seamless as possible. And we do wish you every success in your certification journey. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We have presentations on ISO 9001 2015, the aforementioned interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit. And we have webinars on a variety of other topics, IETF 16949, 13485, and others. We'd like to invite you to opt in for automatic updates of interest on standards and other things going on involving PJR. If you go to our website at www.pjr.com, at the bottom of the page, enter your email address in the provided space and click subscribe, and you will be opted in. I do thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and open the question portion of the dashboard. Are there any questions that I can answer today? Okay, well, I do thank you all for your time. Have a great day.